that. All right, now I'm going to share the screen. All right, you guys see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is ApoB. So ApoB is essentially why we have to worry about cholesterol. So we're going to talk about cholesterol, ApoB specifically, and then the umbrella is cardiovascular disease, right? So cardiovascular disease, if you guys don't know, is the biggest killer by far. I believe it kills somewhere. COVID messed with the statistics a bit, but before COVID, the year previous to COVID, I believe somewhere around, don't quote me, but it was somewhere around 18 million deaths or something like that worldwide, whereas the second biggest killer was cancer at like 10 million. It didn't even come close. It wasn't even the same zip code. It's that crazy, cardiovascular disease. It kills way more than I think the next 3 or 4 leading causes of death put together. So cardiovascular disease, obviously the biggest risk. The what about cardiovascular disease kills you is atherosclerosis. That's what bleeds to what they call MACE, which is some sort of major heart condition, essentially. But think about heart attacks, strokes, things like that. So we're going to dive into this. Obviously, it's a pretty big deal. And the one thing that's a really big deal about this is that the prevention from you having a heart attack starts now. It is not something that you're supposed to do later. This is not a treat the effect or symptom type thing. If you do that, it's a ticking time bomb, which we'll get into. So we're going to talk about ApoB. We're going to understand cholesterol, understand fat, understand lipoproteins. This is really confusing to a lot of people, and I hope that after this presentation, this will all make sense, because even to me, this was super confusing the first couple of times that I learned this. And then you'll understand what ApoB is. And then you'll actually understand what the hell you're reading when you look at your blood panel, and why most of the blood panels that we get is essentially useless. So let's dive in. So why cholesterol matters. Cholesterol is super critical. So if you guys are familiar with the cell membrane, the outside of the cell, it has to be pretty fluid, right? It has to, it's a, think it could be rigid and brittle, or it could be nice and fluid. If it's fluid, it allows for communication with other cells. It allows for transportation. You can actually pierce the cell wall and let things into the cell, which is, essentially how we get vitamins and minerals into the cell. So it's really important. Cholesterol is what creates that cell membrane fluidity, right? So if it's brittle, you don't have a lot of cholesterol. You wouldn't be able to get anything to the cell. They wouldn't be able to communicate. You would die in a second. So it's pretty important. This is what cholesterol does. One of the main things that cholesterol does is makes the cell membrane fluid. It also acts as a backbone for testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol. Pretty much all the major hormones of the body need cholesterol to be formed. It's a building block of these hormones. Without cholesterol, we don't have any of those. It's also required for the synthesis of bile acids, which is huge for digestion. You can't break down fat without bile. So you wouldn't even be able to digest anything without cholesterol. Now, obviously, cholesterol is pretty damn important. We would die within seconds without it. Now, because of that, every cell can make cholesterol. And just about every cell in the body has ample amounts of cholesterol. Having a low cholesterol amount in the cell is very rare. If that does happen, your body needs a way to be able to transport cholesterol from one cell to the other, because we do not want to go without cholesterol in any cell for long. So we want to make that sure that happens. Now, cholesterol, make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. Okay. Cholesterol cannot just be, it's hydrophobic, meaning that think about phobia and hydro. It's afraid of the water. Think of it that way. It's a nice, easy way to remember. It's how I remember it. So it can't just float around in the water, right? It's afraid. It needs a friend. And so cholesterol needs to be transported. And that transportation is called a lipoprotein. Okay, we'll come back to that. But cholesterol needs to be transported in the blood. Blood is water. Plasma is water. So it needs to be transported there. It can't go in the water by itself. It's too afraid. So it needs a friend. Okay, the lipoprotein is what carries him around. Okay, that's what's important. Cholesterol is super important for everything. If we need cholesterol bounced cell to cell, we need to transport it. We need to use lipoproteins to transport it. Okay, now, Real quick side note, dietary cholesterol does not equal blood cholesterol. Okay. If you eat cholesterol, it does not increase your blood cholesterol. Okay. This is really important. And I think this gets a little confusing with people too. So, dietary cholesterol is just pretty much irrelevant to blood cholesterol levels. There's a reason for that. Okay. So, it is mostly esterified, it's called, in food form and cannot pass through intestinal cholesterol transporters. So think of it like this. In the gut, there are two key transporters. Okay, so there's two guys, two bouncers essentially in the gut. There's the NPC that allows the sterols in. Okay, so cholesterol is a sterol. It allows cholesterol in. So yeah, you can go ahead. Then once it passes the NPC, it goes to the ABC. I just realized that actually that's ABC, the first three letters. That's pretty funny. Anyway, so it goes to ABC. Okay, he's the next bouncer. If he doesn't like you, he sends you back, right? If there's too much guys in there, if there's too much cholesterol, too many dudes in the club, he's like, "No, we got enough dudes. Get out of here." Right? That's pretty much what ABC does, the bouncer of your gut. Okay, if there's too much cholesterol in there, he's like, "No, get the hell out of here," and kicks you out. Right? Now, what's interesting is esterified cholesterol. That's a really fancy way of just saying the molecule is immensely different from regular cholesterol floating in your body. But this guy, or the food, or the cholesterol that we get from our food, it can't even get past NPC. It doesn't even allow it. Think of it that like it can't even get to the door to see the bouncer. Okay. So that esterified cholesterol can't even get through him. So it's not even, it doesn't even go through the bouncer. It can't even get to the club possibly at all. It's turned away. It can't even get to the door to see the bouncer. Okay. Now, technically, a very little amount of it can, but it's almost negligible. So we're just kind of ignore that to make this make a little bit more sense. So the point of this is that dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol are two completely different things. So if you're eating cholesterol, think about like shellfish, lobster, shrimp, whatever. It's not going to directly increase your blood cholesterol. So they're two different things. We understand that cholesterol is really important. We do understand that cholesterol has to be transported cell to cell. We're going to expand on all this soon, but at least I want you to know right now, dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol are two different things. What's funny is even in the 1960s, this was very understood. Ansel Keys, who was one of the guys who first figured this out, you can actually look this up. But this was back in the 1960s. This was very clear. So somewhere along the lines, this got like confused again. Not really sure why, but this is as true as it gets. Now, we're going to see how all this comes together soon. But saturated fat does matter when it comes to blood cholesterol. Okay. Saturated fat doesn't equal cholesterol, but it raises LDL and thus ApoB. So we're going to get to this. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. I'm letting people in. Here we go. So foods high in saturated fat, so think butter, red meat, cheese, generally raise LDL and ApoB, which are directly involved in atherosclerosis, which is the thing that basically kills you in time when it comes to cardiovascular disease. Okay, now I'm getting back to this. So saturated fat is think like carnivore diet, right? That's essentially all saturated fat. Where if you think about the healthier fats, not saying that saturated fat is not necessarily unhealthy, but in the right amounts, it is. Saturated fat, meat, cheese, dairy, that kind of thing. Mono and poly unsaturated fat is the fats that's in Mediterranean style food like fish, olive oils, nuts, seeds, all those types of things. Okay, so that would be the unsaturated fat. All right, let's keep going here. So let me back up just one more second. So the reason why this matters is because saturated fat has to be transported by these lipoproteins. And so if you ever seen like eggs kind of get shit on in the media, right? Like, oh, it increases your cholesterol. So eggs have a lot of cholesterol, but again, the dietary cholesterol doesn't influence the serum cholesterol, the blood cholesterol, but the saturated fat does. And so the thing about the egg wasn't the cholesterol, it's the saturated fat of the egg that's the problem. That's what increases the cholesterol. So this is why some things get a little confusing because some people will be like, well, eggs can increase your cholesterol, and it could, but from a different mechanism. Saturated fat and cholesterol are two completely different things. So let's go back to cholesterol and how it's transported. We already kind of said that it needs to be transported cell to cell. Cholesterol, again, is hydrophobic. If that sounds really weird and complicated, just think about phobias and then hydro for water. They're afraid of water. All right. Can't float freely in the blood, which is water. So to move around, it uses lipoproteins. Okay. They're basically spheres that it's rolling around in. Think of it like a car, all right? It travels around it. These include different types of lipoproteins, which I'm sure recognize some of these, or maybe not others. There's VLDL, IDL, LDL, and HDL. The ones that you've probably heard of the most are LDL and HDL. Those are low density lipoproteins and high density lipoproteins. Okay, these are the ones that typically we're looking at when we see cholesterol, or our cholesterol, when we're measuring cholesterol, put it that way. Lipoprotein density, I don't want to get too lost in this, but just to kind of go over it, very low density, then intermediate density, then low density, and then high density. So here's the part that's confusing, and that surely confused the shit out of me when I started learning this. When you're looking at your cholesterol panel or your lipid panel, right, and you're measuring your cholesterol and you're looking at LDL and HDL, whatever, what you're actually looking at technically is LDL-C. It's the cholesterol that's found within the low density lipoproteins. What most people think is that you're looking at the amount of LDL in there. What you're looking at is the actual amount of cholesterol. So most people, if you're looking at your labs, you'll see LDL-C -C when you're looking at your cholesterol panel. Well, unless you're getting some advanced stuff, but usually that's what you see. Now, that is if you took these low density lipoproteins. Remember, these are the cars that are transporting shit around, right? They're transporting cholesterol around. So basically what that measurement is looking at is if you tore the car open and you would see how much cholesterol is inside, that is what you're measuring, what you're looking at. You're not looking at how many particles of LDL there are. In other words, you're not looking at how many cars are in the plasma. You're looking at how much cholesterol is being transported by the cars. Does that make sense? They're two completely different things. So when I first understood this, I thought if you're looking at the cholesterol and you're looking at LDL, you're looking at how many LDLs is in there. Okay. That's not what you're looking at. You're looking at the cholesterol that's inside the LDL. It's a different thing. If you're measuring cholesterol, you're measuring the cholesterol that's being transported, not how many things are transporting. Does that make sense? This is a big, really confusing part, because this is how we get into ApoB and why it's so important. So I'll come back to this to make sure this hits. But cholesterol, obviously important for a lot of things. We got to transport it. It doesn't like going in water, which is the plasma, the bloodstream. Okay, so it needs lipoproteins to be able to transport them. Okay, we don't necessarily measure the particles of lipoproteins. We're not measuring how many lipoproteins are in the blood. What we're measuring when you look at cholesterol or lipid panels is how much cholesterol is being transported by the lipoproteins, not how many lipoproteins there are. The reason why that's an important distinction is because when you look at ApoB, and we're going to get into this, one lipoprotein carries one ApoB. They're one for one. So if you have an LDL or VLDL or a low density lipoprotein, you have also an ApoB molecule. They transport one to one. But again, when you're looking at, and this is why this may be confusing. So that doesn't mean if you look at your LDL that you know how much ApoB you have. Okay. Because when you look at your LDL-C, technically, you're looking at how much cholesterol is being transported by LDL in total. What you don't know is how many transporters there are. Every transporter also has an ApoB. So it's a much more direct measurement to check how much ApoB you have. Okay, it's the combination of the total particles of LDL, of IDL, VLDL. IDL dies really quick, but LDL, VLDL, and something called LPA. So the total amount of cars, right? So these are the cars. The total amount of those cars is directly equal to how much ApoB you have. They're one to one. But again, what you're looking at when you look at a cholesterol panel is you're not looking at how much LDL particles you have. You're looking at how much cholesterol is found in the LDL particles. You're measuring cholesterol, not LDL amounts. Does that make sense? Because this shit took me forever to understand. So there's two different types of particles here. There's the ApoB containing particles, which, as you probably would have guessed, is all the L's, right? The LDL, the VLDL, the IDL, and the LPA. the bad guys. Okay, they do contain ApoB. This is why LDL is looked at more and thought of as bad, and HDL is looked at as good, but it's very incomplete picture, right? HDL has ApoA. It does not have ApoB. So these guys are good. There's no ApoB. Okay, the reason why that's good is because ApoB is the thing that will kill you, essentially, in time. Okay, that's the thing that forms atherosclerosis. It's the causative agent. Jesus, it's what actually will cause atherosclerosis, which is the thing that's bad about cardiovascular disease. LDL versus HDL is not the issues. And this, by the way, this is what you would see in the lipid panel, LDL-C. Because remember, you're measuring the cholesterol that's in LDL. You're not actually measuring the particles of LDL. You're not measuring the particles of HDL. Okay, you're measuring the cholesterol being transported by them, which is two completely different things. So, if you measure your ApoB amount, specifically what you can do in the blood, then you're getting a very complete picture of how much ApoB there is, because that's how you're measuring how many particles there are, how many cars are in the plasma, essentially, that carry the bad guy, right? There's cars, the HDL is a car too, but it carries the good guy. So we're fine with him. We're not cool with the ApoB guys, right? These are the bad dudes. These are like the robbers and the cops, or maybe cops and robbers, depending. But whatever, you guys get what I'm saying. Okay, so how much ApoB is too much? This is where it gets really interesting. So most people in the US are somewhere over 90 to 100. That's very, very normal, let's say. If longevity is your goal and to prevent cardiovascular disease, to live to 100, you want your ApoB to be as close to birth levels as possible, which is somewhere between 20 and 30. This is really fucking low, by the way. If you've ever looked at ApoB levels, this is like, what the fuck? They have done a lot of autopsy studies, which are really fascinating. Going back from Vietnam, I think is when they started doing it, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these wars, we have these autopsy studies where they've studied a lot. And what they have shown is plaque already forming in 18-year-olds. Basically, since we are born, we begin having heart disease or cardiovascular disease. Okay, so quite literally the day that we are birthed, we're dying in some sense. It's probably a really morbid way of saying that, but it's true. So now what's interesting is you can't have cardiovascular disease. It's literally impossible unless you have enough ApoB to cause it. That happens around age of 18 plus. Once you get to that 20 to 30 level of ApoB, and again, since birth, it's slowly increasing over time. Once you get to that 20 or 30, which typically from the autopsy studies happens around 18 to 20 years old-ish, you now have enough to actually die of cardiovascular disease. Not saying you're going to die at 18 to 20, but you have enough ApoB where you could actually have cardiovascular disease. It's like it's like it's a weird comparison, but if you're baking a cake, you need enough egg to make the damn cake, right? You need enough ApoB to have the cake. In this cake is heart attack. I don't know. Weird, but hopefully that made sense. Strange. So one other quick little side note. So LPA, this is a genetic variant of LDL. So it is lumped up and it does play a part because this does also carry ApoB. I don't want to get too lost in all this, but this is a genetic variant. This is a genetic thing. So this is a test that you would want to take genetically. When I do my genomic testing with people, we look at this, we can see what's going on. Typically, 80% of the population, this doesn't matter too much. Somewhere between the other 20%, it does matter because they will have elevated LPAs. Again, these are going to be cars that carry ApoB. So if you have the genetic variants, you may have a lot of these cars out in the bloodstream, which means you also have an inherent increase for ApoB. But again, that's genetic. There's really not much lifestyle it can do there. So here's where it gets more interesting. How do you lower ApoB? Number one, you want to lower triglycerides. Okay, this is typically triglycerides are typically increased from a high carbohydrate intake, which has a lot of insulin resistant issues going on, inflammation, all this kind of stuff. So the same ways you would basically get healthier, reduce your fat, reduce your, go into a calorie deficit to reduce fat, all that kind of stuff will generally lower your triglycerides. You also want to lower your saturated fat, especially if LDL or ApoB are already elevated, because remember, saturated fat is going to need those carbs to be transported as well. So if the more saturated fat you eat, the more carbs you now need to transport it. Those carbs also have ApoB, right? So you want to reduce your saturated fat as much as possible. Well, maybe not as much as possible. You probably want to reduce it. And you want to increase fiber and unsaturated fats. That's monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Don't worry too much about which is which. It's just if you're eating Mediterranean, you're doing good. So like fish, olives, olive oil, nuts, seeds, avocado, that kind of stuff. That will increase this just fine. Also, reducing alcohol will help, especially triglycerides. So from a lifestyle point of view, get lean, decrease your triglycerides, decrease your saturated fat, alcohol. It's kind of all the same shit that we all know, right? Now, the bad news here is that there's no way in hell that will get your ApoB less than 30. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. So then everybody's going to ask, well, then how the hell do you do it? Drugs. That is pretty much the only way to do it. So you can lower your ApoB. I have done this myself. I have tested my ApoB. I've tested a lot of stuff. And to give you guys an idea, I had an ApoB, I believe. I should have put the results in here, but I think it was somewhere around 90 to 100. I lowered it to about 60 to 70 by taking a very low dose statin. I think it was about 5 milligrams of atorvastatin, something like that. Very low dose statin, and it got down a lot. Before I took the statin, I changed my diet dramatically, and I did lower it, but I think I lowered it somewhere from like 90 to 100 to like 80, something like that. In order to get it to the 60 to 70 mark, I had to take a low dose statin to do it. It was not budging otherwise. And so if you think back to the idea of trying to get your ApoB to be the level that makes it impossible to bake the cake, so to speak, right? If you don't have enough egg, you can't bake the cake. We don't want to have a heart attack, right? We don't want the ingredients to have a heart attack. And so getting your ApoB at 30 or under, you take that away. There is no ingredient to have a heart attack. Well, technically to have atherosclerosis, which builds into a heart attack, but you know what I mean? So in order to do that, yes, you can change your lifestyle, but then from there, pharmaceutical is the only way to do it. And there's a whole bunch of different things that we could do here. Statins are typically the first in line. They're the most common. They're probably the cheapest and the most covered by insurance, a whole bunch of reasons. But at low dose, they also do have generally pretty low side effects. They get pretty shit on for a lot of reasons, but for most people, low dose is completely fine. But basically, the way statins work is they block cholesterol synthesis in the liver, and the liver is what increases LDL receptors. So it basically pulls ApoB particles from the blood. So it's kind of like, shit, I don't have enough LDL. Let me put the receptors up here. It says, hey, give me LDLs from the blood, and then it gobbles them up. And guess what? That means that we're taking the cars off the road, right? That means that we have less ApoB. So that's how statins work, okay? There's something else called azenobimbine or some shit. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it blocks the absorption of cholesterol in the gut. So it's a little bit different of a mechanism. This is a good replacement for a statin if there's any complications with the statin. It's less effective than a statin because statins are doing this globally. They're doing it all throughout the body. They're pulling it from the blood. This is only doing it in the gut. Okay, so it's not doing it on a global scale, so it's not going to have as big of an impact. But because it has less of an impact, it also has less side effects. So it is a alternative to a statin. There is also the bemfoic acid, I believe it's called, which inhibits cholesterol synthesis in the liver only, similar to only in the gut. It has less side effects, and it's kind of another use for a statin. Now, the miracle drug, so to speak, is the PCSK9 inhibitors. Okay, this prevents the degradation of LDL receptors, which increases the LDL clearance from the blood. So basically, the LDL receptors of saying, hey, come here, never degrade. And if you have the ability to increase the amount of receptors, then not only is they're not degrading, now you're adding more, and you have like a whole fucking army that's screaming at LDL to come in, right? So we're taking, it's basically like the equivalent of, having shit. What is it when the military comes in instead of the police? And they're like
SWAT?
streets and shit. What is it?
The SWAT team?
No, not the SWAT. The fuck, god damn it.
The
Martial
military?
law type shit.
Oh.
When the army comes in, I forgot what I'm talking about. But it's like, it's like having martial law, right? And it's like, hey, all the cars gotta get off the road. The military's coming in now. Everybody's getting the cars off the road, right? This is pretty much what happens when you increase the activity of the PCSK9. Okay. And if you do that, you are directly getting at the LDL molecule and the ApoB molecule and taking it right out of the fucking blood like that. And it has almost zero side effects, and it's really fucking useful. It's a miracle, essentially. Now, the way that they found this out was actually through studying, again, autopsies, and they looked at mutations. And what they found was people with underactive enzymes with the PCSK9 were getting cardiovascular disease fast, and they were getting heart disease fast, and they were building up atherosclerosis fast. And that's because of the degradation or the LDL receptors. The guys that were saying, come here, cars, get off the road, were dying. So they didn't have anybody out there. On the flip side, they found people who had this mutation where with that gene or with that enzyme, they had more of them than they should have. They were hyperactive. They had so many guys out there that were getting these cars off the road. And that's how they were able to figure out, oh shit, this is the key. So they made a drug that was able to mimic that, essentially. Now, the hard part about this is that statins are pretty cheap. This other stuff, somewhat, I think, a little bit hard to get. These guys, you can get right online. Problem is, they are really expensive. Last I looked, it was somewhere around $1,000 to $1,500 a month. Yeah, it's a lot. They are really effective, but really expensive. To my knowledge, I have no idea how insurance deals with this. I don't even think there is an insurance. I don't know. I don't think there's any insurance like ability with this drug yet. They're hoping that in time it will become almost like Ozempic's becoming now, where it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for people to be able to take. And at least now Ozempic is, I guess, kind of expensive, but nowhere near as expensive as it could have been. And that's where they're hoping this gets to. And if that's the case, then it's a miracle because you're essentially, you're almost quite literally getting rid of your body's ability to have cardiovascular disease, which is insane. I mean, that's what's killing all of us. So absolutely insane. Now, two other things that I want to talk about first. Like I was saying before, cardiovascular disease is a lifelong disease that starts early. Essentially, when we're born, we're dying. we're building up our capacity for death. Just because you don't have plaque now doesn't mean you're safe. Okay, this is like saying I smoke, but I haven't gotten cancer yet. Okay, the point that I'm making with that is that just because you may not have plaque buildup yet, or you may not have markers of atherosclerosis buildup, and you have high ApoB, it doesn't mean that the bad effects aren't going to happen. They are. That's like saying I'm smoking now and I'm seeing the plaque build up, but I'm not dying yet, so I must be fine, right? This is what ApoB is to us in the blood. If you are having cholesterol issues or whatever, something inside is not going right, cardiovascular disease on the horizon, we can measure that by the ApoB level. Right? Just because you don't have the plaque buildup yet, but the ApoB is high, it's like a ticking time bomb. Okay. Yes, there may be some exceptions out there. Everybody knows Grandma Josie, who's fucking 95, who's been smoking like a chimney forever and she's fine. But those are obviously the exceptions, right? We don't want to make that gamble. So yes, there's probably people out there that, can be the exception, but it's not a gamble you want to make. Just like, blood pressure, for instance, right? We know blood pressure, high blood pressure can damage a whole bunch of things. It puts us at risk. And so what do? We treat blood pressure, right? Because that's going to form into other things. If you just, had high blood pressure and you're like, hey, I'll be fine. I'm not having a heart attack yet, blah, blah, blah. Obviously not a good idea, right? That's the same as ApoB. Just because you don't have plaque buildup or anything else and your ApoB is high doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to lower ApoB. You absolutely should. You should be taking away the ability for your body to have cardiovascular disease. So a couple little misconceptions here. My LDL and HDL are in normal range, so I'm safe. No. Okay. So again, this is the part that I really want you guys to understand and even be able to explain to your doctors, because honestly, they probably may not understand this. Some doctors are brilliant with it. Some have no fucking clue from my experience anyway. When you're looking at your blood work, when you're looking at the cholesterol panel, when you're looking at your lipid panel, what you're going to see is that LDL-C, HDL-C. Remember, you're not measuring, if you think about those as transporters, you're not measuring how many transporters there are. You're measuring how much cholesterol they're carrying. So if you split them open, you would see how much cholesterol is in there. That's what your LDL-C is. You're not actually measuring the molecules of how many LDLs there are. So you're not actually measuring LDL. You're measuring the cholesterol in the LDL. Okay, it's a big difference. LDL has an ApoB. Okay, if we measure ApoB, we'll get the really definitive look at how risky you are. To put this another way, I had a total cholesterol of like 135, super low. My ApoB was still 90 something. Didn't fucking matter. Okay, so my point of that is, like, you cannot look at your cholesterol low or high and depict anything. The experts in like the ApoB, like, they don't give a shit what your cholesterol is. Like, they don't even look at it. It's almost useless. You have to look at the ApoB. Okay, there is some small benefit of HDL going up, I mean, for other reasons, but as it comes to ApoB, it's not really going to help you. And that's why I didn't even realize that was written here. Oops. The ratio of HDL to LDL is less relevant than the absolute ApoB. It doesn't really matter, okay, at all. So if you think you're safe or healthy or bad, even from cholesterol, it's almost useless in that way. Most U.S. physicians don't measure ApoB at all. Most of them don't even know what the hell it is. I had to argue with my mom's doctor like for 10 minutes on the phone to check her ApoB, and he said they did and they didn't, and whatever. It's crazy. This, by the way, is only a U.S. thing. In Europe and shit, they have very tight markers on ApoB. This is like very well known, but for some reason here it's not. There's some lipid, I'll say, lipid specialists in the U.S. that have a hold of some of the communication around this stuff, and I think that's kind of part of the reason why it's not too popular here, but it should be. Cholesterol confusion often stems from grouping LDL and ApoB or using LDL-C as a proxy when ApoB is more precise. This is the most important part of this right here, okay? I know I said this 1,000 times, but I want to make sure this really clicks. It is when you're looking at your cholesterol and lipid blood work, okay, you see that LDL. What they're measuring is the cholesterol that's within your LDL. Remember, it is a cholesterol test, okay? Those are cholesterol tests. They're not actually looking or testing your lipoproteins. They're not testing how much lipoproteins you have. They're testing how much cholesterol is within them, okay? What we want to know is how much lipodensity proteins you have in total, because that's where the ApoB is. And so the ApoB is going to give you a really good insight as to your risk. We're looking at cholesterol or LDL or HDL and all that stuff. Will not. Okay, so any questions? I know there's a lot going on here. I know this is like this is pretty fucking nuts.
Do you have to stay on a statin like forever, or
yeah,
will it
pretty
lower
much.
it and you come? Okay.
Yeah, so this stuff is you'll pretty much be taking, where the hell is that slide? Yeah. So this stuff you pretty much take, yeah, it's pretty much forever. I took the statin, came off the statin, and then my ApoB went right back to where it was. So yeah, this is yeah, because again, if you think about it, your body's always trying to form this stuff essentially, like from when you're born. And so what we're doing is canceling out, we're blocking the ability for it to be formed. But as soon as you take that out, it goes right back to being formed.
Okay.
So yeah, these are things that if you really want to live to 100, that's the route to take for sure. Obviously, it helps to eat good and stuff. You don't want to just hop on the drugs and treat your body like shit. But there is no way to get there, so to speak, without it. And let me answer some questions here. Why is my chat all messed up? What's going on here? Thank you, Jenny. Hopefully that made sense. Michelle, how long on the statin until you saw a lower level? Oh, that's a good question. It happened quick. I think so. When I started, I want to say it was 3 months. I had to look back, but I'm pretty sure because I usually would look at the blood work every 3 months. Pretty sure it was about 3 months. It was a couple months that I didn't use the statin and I changed my diet. And then it was a couple months after that where I kept the diet and added the statin. And so I went from like 90 to 100 ish down to like 60 to 70 ish, which is a pretty big decrease rather. But it was half and half. So half of that was just the diet, and then the other half was the statin. But I definitely wasn't getting anywhere past that like 80 ish with a good diet.
So from 80 to 60 is really when you changed the diet and then added the statin.
UV light.
Wait, what'd you say? Sorry.
So you went from 80, so you went down to 80 with just the diet change, then you went on the statin and continued the diet change and went on the statin and you got down to around 60.
Yep, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And then let's see. Jenny, do you mind me asking what do you think you were eating that contributed to this? So like I was eating like shit. So full disclosure, so when my ApoB got to be the highest, when it was like 90 to 100, I was right before Strongman Worlds. So the foods I was eating was all saturated fat, awful. I literally remember. So just to give like a background to this, I had to eat about 8,000 calories a day. Just to preserve my weight. So at the time, for some reason, charcuterie boards, I think it was Lindsay's fault. I'm going to blame Lindsay on this. She was making like some fire charcuterie boards I was getting obsessed with. So I was basically eating like meat and cheese all the time. So like my diet was pretty much like the worst thing you could do.
And biggie bags from Wendy's.
Yeah, it was bad. But then also taking a load of testosterone, not TRT level testosterone, like competing in strongman, I was taking like 3 times the average person. I would, could have killed a horse the amount of testosterone I was taking. So that also amplified it. But then taking all of that out is when it went back down to 80-ish, I think it was. That's when the diet was relatively good. The testosterone was at normal level. Took out the meat and cheese, added some fish once in a while, some olive oil, some good stuff. And then that's when it got to like 80-ish. And then it capped there. I'm pretty sure I did. Oh no. Okay. So yeah, I went down to 80-ish with just the diet. Then I added the statin. Then I went to 60-ish. Then I got rid of the statin and my diet was still relatively healthy. And that's when it went back to 80-ish. So that's how I knew that the statin was the thing. If that makes
and you
sense.
were on like what, 5 milligrams?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was either 5 or 10 tops. It was very low.
Interesting.
But yeah, it was about 5 to 10. Which is, I think there's very strong diminishing returns. I'm pretty sure it's after like 10 to 15 milligrams or something like that when it comes to atorvastatin. So like if you take more than that, you're not really helping anything, but you're starting to accumulate side effects. Where if you take less than that, you're pretty much getting the bulk of the good stuff, but without much of the bad stuff. The PKS9 inhibitor is definitely the gold. But it takes gold. You gotta be rich to get that shit. That is, by the way, Peter Attia is the guy that I studied a lot of this stuff from. So if you guys are unfamiliar, his name, I'll put it in the chat. He's a doctor, but I'm just writing his name. He's the guy, if you guys want to study this in depth, he is the guy. And so he got his ApoB down to around that 30-ish. But he did it using all of those drugs. He takes the PKS9 inhibitor. So it's it's pretty crazy. Let's see what else we got. Andrea, I can tell you were understanding all that, by the way, Andrea. So love it. Can a person eat egg whites and 2% cottage cheese if they have a history of high cholesterol and stuff? Yeah, I think so. So I think so that brings up a whole other thing in terms of the history of cholesterol, because that's usually pointing more towards like genomics and things like that, and genetics and variants. And so one thing I would be thinking about is like if there's this is for everybody too. If there's any type of high cholesterol or cholesterol issues or cardiovascular disease and all that kind of stuff that runs in the family, definitely check ApoB. But then also look at LPA, because that's one of the guys that accumulates that also has ApoB in them. And that has a huge genetic variant to it. Like most people are unaffected by it. Some people have loads of it. And there's nothing you can do really lifestyle wise to fix that. It just accumulates into your ApoB.
Is that a standard blood test also, or
no? Yeah,
so
of
that's the
course.
fancy one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, all the good stuff they don't give you. What they're essentially trying to do is like look at LDL, and it's I don't even know. It doesn't really make sense at all. Like if they were looking at LDL particles, it would make sense because you're looking at, okay, that's the ratio of ApoB, but it's not what they do. So, but to answer your question, yes, for sure. You can definitely still eat cholesterol, even if it runs high in your family, and be okay that it's not going to increase your blood cholesterol. Because that the bouncers, so to speak, in your gut are really good at kicking out cholesterol. It's also just they have to be really good because it's such an important thing for our bodies that they have to regulate cholesterol really well. So cholesterol itself is regulated amazingly well. It's the lipoproteins that's not really regulated well. And then the fat and the saturated fat that has to be transported, and that's where the party starts hopping. That's where we really get the party going. Let me stop this. Should I stop the recording? No. I also have some questions if I can find them. Where did I put them? So some common questions that like may come up if you start thinking about this, or that do come up. Let's see. One, saturated fat. Should I stop eating it completely? No, I'm not. I don't want you guys to think that saturated fat is bad. It is still a building block for a lot of hormones. But if your ApoB is high and your saturated fat is high, then yeah, definitely lower. So we got to look at a couple of markers here. You got to look at your diet, obviously, to see where most of your fat's coming from, which you're tracking your calories. You can see that pretty easily. You shouldn't. Most of your fat shouldn't be coming from saturated fat. You should get some for sure, but not most of it should be coming from that. And then you got to look at the ApoB to see what's going on. The number of so the other thing is HDL is not a protective factor. So this is another thing that may come out, like, if I boost up my HDL, is that going to lower my ApoB? No. So HDL is not a protective factor. Just because you have a lot of HDL, all that means is that, okay, there are a lot of cars on the road that aren't bad. It doesn't mean that because there's a lot of cars on the road that aren't bad, that there's going to be less cars on the road that are bad, right? So it doesn't necessarily help you. It's just not hurting you when it comes to ApoB. Let's see. Is there a natural way to get ApoB under 30? Another common question. Nope. The only way that happens, by the way, is people who have the PKS9 inhibitor mutation who have that naturally. So it's essentially like they're taking that drug. That's how we found out about it. And so for those people, yeah, their natural level is going to be 30, but it's not necessarily natural. It's because they have a mutation. And what we're trying to do is mimic that mutation by taking the drug, essentially. LDL-C and ApoB. But let me actually put this. Is anybody still confused with LDL versus ApoB? Does that like make sense that they're not the same? Because that's this shit confused the shit out of me for a while. So I see everybody gets that. What you're looking at when you look at, let me actually hold on. Let me pull up my blood work really quick. Let's see if I can find it. If anybody has questions, by the way, you can shout them out while I try to find my blood work somewhere hidden in the archives here.
Are there any specific labs that only do the ApoB test, or is it just basic labs just having a script for it?
You can get it done through like I can get it all done for you easily, but you could also just buy it right through mypersonallabs.com. And I think it's only like 30 or 40 bucks or something. Most doctors will do it though. They just don't know what it is half the time. Which is always fun to try to explain. All right, here we go. All right. I want to show you guys my stop this.